This system is both easy to learn and highly effective. Just ask all of Magnus's heartbroken opponents. The Catalan opening leads to highly advantageous positions with minimal preparation. In addition to going over the key middle game ideas, pro tip, having the best middle game ideas is how you win in the opening. In addition to going over those ideas, we're also going to see Black's other defensive setups and how we can break them with this opening system. The beautiful thing about this opening system is that the ideas apply against all sorts of different responses from Black. Against d4, d5, this will also happen if Black starts right away. A lot of times you can play this knight, and right now we are entering into a Queen's Gambit declined type of line. Black can play right here, and we're going straight to get our bishop on this diagonal. We're going to be targeting this rook in a lot of different lines. And as play continues, this is really going to be our starting position. Both players are castled. We have this bishop we're trying to open up, and we've been giving up this pawn on c4 for quite a while. If Black decides to take it, that's going to open up the scope of this bishop for us, and that's going to be great. There's a bunch of different ways to recapture this pawn. We can move our knight over here. We can move our knight right here. Actually, Magnus really likes this idea. You give up this knight. You get doubled pawns, but now you've got both bishops. So if I just put that one on the line really quick, what he'll end up doing is after we get some developing moves, he'll do this. He'll get his bishop over here, attack this rook, and he's going to have a lot of really, really active pieces. That's a little bit more of an advanced line. Instead of that, you can, like I mentioned, play this knight over here. You can play this knight over here, which also supports this e5 push. That's another key idea. And finally, what you can do is you can bring your queen up to c2. That also attacks this pawn right here and supports e4 in the future if you want to go for that line as well. Black has a couple different ways right here. What he's thinking is, okay, I could play my pawn here, then I could play my pawn to b5 and defend this pawn. If instead of that, he decides to play b5 right away, that's really not going to work out very well for him. That's opening up the rook right here. And instead of just going for that right away, if you just go for, let's just say, knight here, this knight could actually block the bishop's scope right there. So that's not quite the best move. Better is to undermine that pawn push. So undermining is if he takes here, now he's going to have doubled pawns. There's going to be no defender right here. And of course, if Black decides to try to defend right here, well, that's really not much of a defense. You can't recapture here because you're giving up your rook. And instead, if he pushes right here, that's going to be even worse. If he recaptures right here, this is just too weak. The really fun move in this position right here is actually to move your knight all the way up here. You're going to be attacking this rook, and unfortunately, Black doesn't have this defensive resource because that's going to be checkmate right here on h7. You know, sample line might be something like captures and then captures that rook in the corner. So back to this position, Black is going, okay, well, I'm going to defend this way. You play this a4 move anyway. It's a very similar idea. You're just preventing this from moving forward. And now when the queen recaptures, you can see in this position that this bishop on g2 is just much better than this bishop here. It's really difficult for this bishop to get developed into the game in a meaningful way. White's going to have a lot more easy development. Another idea here, you can play your bishop out here to g5, maybe eventually even getting rid of that knight, playing all your pawns here onto dark squares. And then, of course, your knight either c3 or d2 to support this pawn push. White's going to have a pretty simple game from here. So all that happens after this pawn capture. Actually, the pawn capturing is the easiest way for White to play against this. Instead of that, let's just say that Black doesn't want to make it so easy. He wants to do a little bit of a copycat type move, and now White has to decide what to do. One way that I like to play this position is to capture, and after recapturing here, we give Black an isolated queen pawn. So isolated meaning there's no pawns over here to help defend this pawn in the middle, and it's a queen pawn because it's right in front of the queen. And when you're playing against an isolated queen pawn, you're going to want to slowly build up pressure on that pawn and eventually capture it for basically nothing. That's the whole idea. The benefit of having the isolated queen pawn is that you're able to attack a little bit more. You've got a little bit more space. But in this case, Black doesn't have his pieces developed yet. It's going to take him a little bit to get developed. And so this is a good position here for White. Pinning this knight right away. If the knight develops right here, you might be tempted, okay, I'm going to push this e3 move right now. And that e3 move, I'm going to prevent the isolated queen pawn from moving forward. That's a bit of a trap because in this case, Black can just jump forward here, and now he's given up his weakness already. So you're not going to want to push that unless there's a strong reason to do so, unless it actually prevents that pawn from moving forward. Instead of that, moving this queen over to c2, that gains a tempo on this bishop. The bishop has to move somewhere, let's say, back to here. The rook can grab here into the center. Black's getting his other pieces developed. The knight goes to a natural square right here, again, attacking this pawn yet again. We're trying to bait this pawn to eventually move forward. If this pawn moves forward, the knight's going to potentially go right there, and now we've got this attacking, this rook attacking, and this pawn's going to get overextended. If your pawns move too far forward, they become targets. Your opponent, in this case, we're the opponent, we're going to be able to grab that pawn. And here, Black can, kick out the bishop. Now we're going to move back. We're going to prevent this pawn from moving forward because we've got 1, 2, 3 pieces right here preventing that pawn from moving forward versus only 2 supporting pieces from Black being able to do anything about that. We move our rook here to the center, and you can tell we've got both the open file and the semi-open file. We're lining up pressure. White here as well, out of the opening, has a really, really easy game, really easy development from this system. Let's check out a couple different completely out there systems that are unfamiliar. One of the most common of which being an Indian type setup. So this is either the King's Indian defense or the Nimzo Indian defense. It doesn't matter too much. Let's say he plays the King's Indian. We can, again, play this knight out, and he's going to be castling over here. It's a little bit of a symmetrical type line to what we're going to be playing because we're both going to have fianchettoed bishops. We continue with our normal plan, and after we both castle, we have both of these pawns here, c4, d4, a little bit more space than our opponent does. And if you're familiar with the King's Indian defense players are looking to play these type of pushes over here, potentially locking down the center of the board and going for a big kingside attack. Similar to what we had in the other positions with this bishop here on g2 and with our expansion c4, d4, we're looking to get a big queenside attack. And so in this position right here, if Black does decide to play c5 right away, that's one of his tries. That one, I think, for White is a little bit easier to work with. You can lock the center right here. And now Black, with the c5 approach, is actually going to try to end up attacking on the queen side. It's a little bit of a different approach than his normal King's Indian, where he attacks on the king side. Attacking here, trying to undermine these pawns here on the queen side, it's a little bit risky because if he does push here on b5, again, we are opening up this bishop. We're giving him a little bit more scope. So in this case right here, Black can give up that pawn temporarily, but it gives us a long-term advantage. A4, A5, A6, that's coming. We got the rook right behind it. Eventually, Black's going to be able to recapture this D5 pawn. It's a little bit too weak, a little bit overextended, but when he does do that, this G2 bishop is going to be covering the queening square. So I'm really, really not afraid of this C5 try. So going back, instead of C5, what Black can do, he could play C6, a little bit more of a waiting move. Okay, I'm going to cover all of these squares with my pawns. You come at me, you try to figure out what you're trying to do. So what does White do? White just has, again, natural development moves. It makes it pretty easy. If Black here decides to push forward on D5, that's a little bit of a different approach. you might think, okay, cool, I'm going to trade these right now. But if you trade right now in the center, you are releasing some of that tension. And so instead, queen goes out to a4. We are, just like in our first couple of lines, we're attacking on the queen side as much as possible. We're bringing this over here. The queen can come over. We bring our rook over. We're going to bring our bishop out to whatever square makes sense. We're going to keep pushing on b4, a3. And the final King's Indian idea is knight c6, of course, and then pushing to e5. This gets a little bit crazy if you push here on d5. This is what a King's Indian player really, really likes. Now, this pawn here is actually never going to move because what the King's Indian player is thinking is, okay, once the center's locked, I'm going to be able to push f5, f4. I'm going to be able to make this giant kingside attack, and we're going to see that here in a second. So first off, playing that over here, Black's also thinking, okay, well, I know that White's going to be having this big queenside attack, so this a5 move is intended to parry that thrust, and this knight back is letting the doors open for this, and it just turns into a big race. Black coming down the king side and White going down the queen side. You could see in this position right here that White seems to be just a little bit faster. A couple of key ideas for White is that this square here on e6 is really, really weak. If you could get your knight up to it, you're going to be wanting pushing b4, c5. As soon as you are able to break all the way through here on the queen side, potentially even you'll have both your rooks over here depending on what Black does. And then Black, of course, is going to bring back his knights over to this side of the board. He's going to be pushing up. Maybe he's going to bring his rook and try to attack the king. You should look at some games from Hikaru. He's the master at the King's Indian defense. And one final opening system I will hit right now against d4, f5, the Dutch defense. You can still play this type of system against the Dutch. I actually play the Dutch quite often, and playing against this fianchettoed bishop in Catalan style is quite frustrating. They might try to, okay, I'm going to play c6 to blunt this bishop, and White here has some easy development. You can see with this knight move, this queen move, we're getting ready for e4. That's going to be a really common idea. This knight coming out, it was going to kick away the queen here by jumping to b4, so we're preventing that. And this b3 move, unlike our other systems, since the Dutch, we've opened up on this f5 move, we've opened up and weakened this king a little bit, we're going to be getting our bishop over here to b2 and attacking the Black king. And when the moment is right, we jump forward on e4, we blow up the center of the board, and it's going to be a fun game for us. The main system we have not covered yet deserves a little bit more focus. The Benoni is an advanced opening that we will hit in detail in our next video. I've been experimenting with it. It is super fun. We're going to cover it from both the Black and the White side. Subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great night. I'll see you around here soon.